What if the strongest power in the apocalypse wasn't a legendary sword, but the one item everybody laughed at? This is the story of a man who picked comfort over glory and turned an entire world's mockery into his weapon. His name was Jonah, and before any of this started, he was nobody special. Not the fastest, not the strongest, not even the guy who got the last slice of pizza at the office party. He was standing in a crosswalk holding a half-cold coffee when the sky above the city cracked open. Cars froze in place like toys someone forgot to wind up. Traffic lights flickered through colors that should not exist. Then a black window appeared in front of his face, clean and sharp, like reality itself had been cut open. "Choose one starter equipment," it said. No warning, no explanation, just one sentence hanging in the air while the whole city groaned like a waking beast. The windows shattered into silver dust, and the street disappeared beneath his feet. He landed in a white room so bright it burned his eyes. Thousands of people stood around him, screaming, crying, grabbing their own faces just to make sure they were still alive. Above them, weapons hung in glowing circles. Swords wrapped in lightning, spears carved with dragon heads, shields covered in burning runes. Panic lasted about 3 seconds. Then greed took over. A man grabbed a sword as tall as himself, and thunder exploded across the room the moment he touched it. A woman took a golden bow, and wings of light burst from her shoulders. Someone else grabbed the black ring, vanished into smoke, and came back with purple fire in his eyes. Jonah had never been fast in his life, not at work, not at school, not even when free food was on the line. By the time he pushed through the crowd, every legendary item was already gone. What was left drifted near the back wall like scraps nobody wanted. A cracked wooden spoon, a pair of green socks, a chipped cup, a knotted rope, and one plain brown belt. He touched the belt, and a tiny window opened above it. Comfortable fit, it read. Not plus strength, not dragon slayer, not moon emperor, just comfortable fit. Somewhere behind him, a man with a sword made of red crystal laughed so hard he nearly choked. The crowd noticed Jonah's hand on the belt, and a scared crowd that starts laughing always laughs a little too loud. He heard every joke. The apocalypse started, and he picked off his casual. Maybe his final skill would be belt discount, somebody shouted. He almost let go of it right there. But every better item was gone, and a timer above them started counting down from 10. So he grabbed the belt and wrapped it around his waist. It fit perfectly. Somehow, that made him even angrier. The room collapsed into light, and when he opened his eyes he was standing in a town square that did not exist anywhere on Earth. Stone streets, wooden shops, tall watchtowers, and a fountain glowing under the sun. Above the gate, another black window floated in the air. Safe zone, Ashford, it read. Monsters cannot enter. Player combat forbidden inside the inner wall. Players poured through the gate around him, cheering, crying, comparing weapons, running for the shops. Jonah stood still, wearing the dumbest belt in the apocalypse and the dumbest expression on his face. Then he tried to buy bread, and that was when his life stopped making sense. The merchant looked straight past him. Hey, 1 loaf, Jonah said. The man kept wiping the counter like nothing had spoken. Jonah waved a hand in front of his face. Nothing. I'm standing right here, he said, leaning over the counter. The merchant's eyes drifted past him and landed on the next customer instead. A stranger walked straight into Jonah's shoulder, cursed at the empty air, and looked confused when his body bounced sideways. People could touch him. People could hear him. But nobody's eyes could hold onto his shape. Their gaze slid off him like water off glass, and forgot what it had been looking for. The belt was not hiding his body. It was making him unimportant to sight itself. He found out how dangerous that could be outside the bakery. 3 players with shiny starter weapons had a thin man cornered against the wall, demanding his food. The biggest one carried a flame axe and a grin full of bad ideas. Jonah walked up beside him, still holding bread nobody had bothered to charge him for, and whispered into his ear. Your haircut lost a fight with a lawnmower, he said. The man let out a full, broken, haunted house scream that sent pigeons scattering off the roof. He spun around swinging the flame axe, saw nothing, and cut a burning line through the bakery sign. Inside the safe zone, that counted as an attack. Blue chain shot from the stones and wrapped around his wrist. Before he understood what had happened, Jonah stood 2 feet away, chewing stolen bread, and understood something important about himself. He had not picked the weakest item in the room. He had picked the funniest one. And in a world full of glowing weapons, funny could become terrifying. The first day was chaos everywhere. Players rushed out to fight low-level monsters and came back bleeding, bragging, or not at all. The legendary weapon holders acted like fate itself had chosen them. Everyone else learned fast that starter equipment did not replace common sense. Jonah learned faster than most, because his belt seemed to punish stupidity in other people. He tested small things first. He balanced an apple on his head and walked through a crowded market. People bumped into him, apologized to the empty air, then forgot why they had apologized at all. He stood behind a fire image while the man bragged about his spell, then nudged his hand before he cast it. The fireball shot backward into a horse trough, and the image blamed the horse. But the belt had limits. Too much noise, and people turned toward the sound, even if they still could not see him. Too hard to touch, and someone could grab him by pure instinct. And the moment he took the belt off, everyone saw him clearly. Just Jonah, the idiot who picked a fashion accessory during the end of the world. The mockery followed him whenever he let himself be seen. A guy with a holy shield asked if he needed help tightening his legendary pants. A girl with lightning boots circled him and suggested he upgrade to suspenders. Jonah just smiled, because he had already stolen her spare bootlaces and tied them into a perfect knot. She face-planted 5 seconds later. That was the first time somebody called him cursed. It felt better than being called useless. At sunset, the town bell rang, and a new objective appeared over the square. Clear the northern borough before dawn, it read. Failure penalty, a monster wave at first light. The brave players cheered. The smart ones went quiet, and the legendary weapon crowd marched toward the north gate, like a parade of overconfident fireworks. Jonah followed behind them, belt on, walking between people who never once looked down. He did not know it yet, but the belt was about to teach him its first real lesson. Being invisible was not about hiding. It was about becoming the thing nobody thought to look for. And nobody, not even the strongest players in that crowd, was ready for what a forgotten man could do in the dark. The northern borough was not a cave. It was a wound in the earth, roots twisting around the entrance like fingers. The air thick with old blood and wet dirt. Goblin-like monsters swarmed out fast and ugly, holding bone knives. The sword players charged in first, and did fine until the floor trap started opening beneath them. A glowing blade is nothing when the ground itself decides to swallow you. Jonah walked around the first trap because he had watched 3 people fall into it already. He walked around the second because the goblins were too busy staring at the loud fighters. By the time the front line reached the first chamber, half of them were already exhausted. A nest of goblins swarmed the walls, and the man who had laughed loudest at Jonah's belt started screaming for help. Nobody heard him over the noise. Jonah picked up a fallen bone knife, slipped behind the goblins, and started cutting pouches open. He dropped a trail of shiny lure powder toward a hidden pit trap and kicked it forward. The goblins abandoned the players instantly, chasing the scent straight into the hole, one after another, like ugly coins falling into a fountain. The front line stared at the suddenly empty chamber, completely confused. Did my aura scare them? The red sword player panted, and Jonah nearly swallowed his own tongue trying not to laugh. Deeper in the burrow, the boss waited. A fat 6-armed creature wearing a headpiece made of broken jawbones. The players charged, and the boss smashed the floor, sending them scattering in every direction. Jonah did not attack it. He walked behind it instead, loosened the straps on its headpiece, and tied it to a hanging root above. When the boss lunged, its own head snapped backward, its arms flailed, and its club flew straight into its own foot. The players saw a boss slip into slapstick disaster. Jonah saw an opening. A Holy Shield player slid on spilled goblin powder and crashed straight into the monster. Jonah shoved the fallen shield under its other foot, and it collapsed onto its own weapon. A damage number bigger than a month's rent exploded above its head, and the chamber went silent. Contribution calculated, the system announced. Most valuable player, unknown. A reward chest opened in front of nobody, and every player stared at the empty space where it hovered. Jonah walked up, opened it wider, and found gold potions and a black buckle lined with tiny silver teeth. The moment he touched it, warmth spread across his waist. Skill acquired, silent buckle. His breathing vanished, not stopped, vanished. Swallow the same way sound disappears under a heavy blanket. Back in Ashford, the players argued over who deserved the mysterious reward. The red swordman claimed his final attack broke the chest open. The Holy Shield player insisted he created the opening by bravely falling in the perfect direction. Jonah stood in the fountain, invisible and silent, and poured cold water down the back of every liar's shirt, one by one. By morning, Ashford had new rumors. A ghost lived inside the safe zone, one that hated bragging and had excellent aim. He should have been more careful after that. But power makes people stupid, and hidden power makes them creative in the worst possible way. He spent days learning the belt's shape, small items ignored, moved objects excused by wind or crooked tables, mischief with perfect deniability. Then he saw the bodies. On the western road, past the safe zone boundary. The game did not care how players treated each other. A group of player killers had built a camp in an old orchard, and they did not fight monsters for loot. They ambushed tired travelers, stole everything, and left them tied to trees as bait. Their leader called himself Trevor, and he said his own name far too often for anyone to forget it. He carried a chain blade, a long black weapon that moved like a snake and cut like a saw. He wore a smile that looked practiced in front of broken people. And he had roughly 20 followers who laughed while prisoners begged. Jonah stood silent in the middle of their camp, and for the first time since putting on the belt, his jokes died in his throat. There are moments when being invisible stops feeling funny. 5 prisoners knelt with their hands tied that night. One of them a broad-shouldered player named Owen, bruised and whispering his own name just to remember who he was. Jonah placed a stolen leather pouch inside Trevor's boot, then cut the prisoners free one by one. Pressing a finger to Owen's lips when he gasped, he opened every monster cage in the camp and let the beast loose. They smelled the lure in Trevor's boot instantly, and the first one launched itself across the camp like a furry cannonball. Trevor got bitten on the ankle before he even stood up. His followers scattered, the beast poured out chasing the scent, and Jonah looped one chain link around the leg of Trevor's chair. His first furious swing yanked the chair straight into the fire. The fire jumped to the cart. The cart rolled downhill, and maybe, just maybe, somebody gave it a push. Owen and the other prisoners escaped in the chaos, but Jonah stayed behind. Because chaos was not justice. Chaos was only the door opening. He dragged 3 unconscious criminals to the safe zone line, removed his belt just long enough for them to see his face, and put it back on before they could react. They woke up screaming at empty air and swinging wildly right across the blue boundary line. The safe zone chains erupted instantly. By sunrise, half of Trevor's camp sat in the town jail. Trevor himself escaped, and that bothered Jonah more than he wanted to admit. Owen found him near the fountain later. Not exactly found him, just stood close and said, "I know you're around, ghost guy." Jonah took off the belt. Owen jumped, then pretended he hadn't. "You're the belt guy," he said. "I prefer ghost guy," Jonah answered. "People laugh at seat belts too until they fly through a windshield," he added. And Owen actually laughed at that one. Owen was loud, careless, and had the subtlety of a dropped piano. But he had a good heart and courage that survived fear instead of pretending fear didn't exist. Jonah told him no when he asked to tag along. He worked better alone. That afternoon a new objective appeared. Escort supply wagons through the dusk road. Reward increasing with survival rate. A woman named Grace organized the strongest group near the east gate, carrying a silver spear that unfolded into 3 floating blades. She did not brag. She watched everything, and that made her more dangerous than anyone Jonah had seen so far. "Something helped us in the burrow," she told the crowd, "something we could not see." Everyone went quiet. Jonah stood behind her, eating another unpaid apple, and her eyes drifted toward the empty space near him and narrowed. For half a second, he thought she had actually seen him. She hadn't, but she had noticed the absence. The way people unconsciously walked around the same patch of air. "Whoever you are," she said quietly, "stay out of my formation unless you plan to help." So naturally, he helped in the most annoying way possible. Monsters ambushed the wagons from above, dropping toward the drivers. Jonah climbed onto the lead wagon, threw a sack of flour into the air, and the silent buckle hid the toss completely. Monsters hit the flour cloud and came out white and blinking, finally visible to everyone. A second ambush came from underground. Jonah laid a trail of meat toward an empty decoy wagon, and the monsters erupted beneath the wrong target, taking 12 of them straight into a sinkhole. Then Trevor appeared on the ridge, chain blade coiled around his arm, burns still marking his sleeve from the fire he had escaped. He did not know Jonah's name, but he knew something invisible had humiliated him. And men like Trevor could not stand being laughed at by something they could not stab. His group rolled boulders down the slope, and the wagons could not move fast enough to escape. Jonah did the dumbest smart thing of his life. He took off the belt, right in the middle of the road, in full view of the entire battlefield. For one bright, horrible second, everyone saw the plain brown belt standing in front of an avalanche. Then he vanished again and ran. Trevor lost his mind, screaming for his followers to kill him, and every arrow knife. And spell struck the memory of where Jonah had stood, not the reality. He dragged a coil of rope behind him as he ran, letting it catch every stray attack until it snapped tight around a broken wagon's axle. The wagon jerked sideways, spilling iron pots across the road. A falling boulder struck the pots, bounced, and changed direction by inches. In an apocalypse game, inches are where miracles rent apartments. The boulders smashed into each other and rained harmlessly into the valley below. Grace understood first, and led a counterattack up the ridge while Owen charged screaming something about kitchen supplies. Trevor escaped by cutting down a tree and sliding into the ravine. But his followers were not so lucky. The wagons reached Ashford with full supplies, and the reward window opened for everyone. Jonah received a narrow gray strap that seemed to weigh less than air. Skill acquired, weightless strap. His footprints stopped existing entirely. No proof, no trace. Nothing left behind on the ground he walked. That isn't fair, Owen said, staring at his feet. I survived a boulder avalanche with cookware, Jonah answered. Fairness left town yesterday. By the third week, Ashford had changed. People still laughed when he showed up visible, but it was nervous laughter now, the kind that checks behind itself afterward. The ranking board flickered every time he passed, unable to decide how to count someone who kept appearing as unknown. That was how Harper noticed him. She ran a forge near the south wall, short hair, heavy gloves, the calm expression of someone who could fix a sword and judge your soul in the same minute. The first time Jonah entered her forge invisible, she threw a horseshoe at his head without even looking up. Door opened, desk moved, floor didn't creak. She said, either I have a ghost, or someone is abusing a stealth item. He took off the belt. Of course it's the belt guy, she said flatly. I prefer ghost guy, he offered. No, she said. And that was the end of that argument. She could not upgrade the belt directly. It rejected ordinary materials. But she could add attachments if he brought pieces back from dungeons. She also taught him a rule he should have already known. A hidden blade is scary, she said, tightening the buckle. A hidden hand is worse. Focus on placement, not stabbing. Placement became something close to religion for him after that. A sword kills what stands in front of it. A belt lets you decide what stands where. Soon he was not sneaking through fights anymore. He was designing them from the shadows. When player killers tried to ambush new arrivals near the river, he slipped monster eggs into their backpacks and rang a dinner bell from 3 directions at once. River beasts came boiling out of the water, and the killers ran straight across the safe zone line with weapons drawn. They were chained in front of the entire crowd before they understood what had happened. Ashford's jail kept filling up, and the guards started noticing a strange pattern. Evil people seemed to keep attacking things they could not see in full public view. Jonah never denied it. The next major dungeon opened beneath the old cathedral east of town. A mouth-shaped arch lined with stone fangs, and everyone called it the Cathedral of Teeth. The objective was simple: retrieve the bell heart. Simple objectives are lies with good posture. Grace led the strongest team. Owen came because he said he owed the ghost one lifetime and wanted to spend it near sharp things. Harper gave Jonah 3 handmade wire clips, each one strong enough to trip a horse. The first room was covered in sleeping monsters curled around piles of coins, and Jonah walked straight across it, stealing 1 coin from every pile. Every monster woke at exactly the same moment. He dropped all the stolen coins into one far corner, and the beasts crawled over each other to guard the wrong treasure, while the party crossed safely. The second room held a giant statue balancing a scale, and the door would only open when both sides matched perfectly. While the players argued about weight and sacrifice, Jonah quietly moved everyone's pouches until the balance settled. They called it teamwork. He called it petty theft with architectural benefits. Deep below, they found the bell heart, a living metal organ hanging in chains, sending slow waves of sound through the cathedral. Around it slept the guardian, a monster shaped like a priest made of knives, its neck covered in hundreds of tiny ears instead of eyes. The belt hid sight, sound, and footprints, but the guardian listened for heartbeats, and Jonah's own pulse betrayed him the moment he got close. The guardian unfolded and screamed. Sound blasted through the chamber, throwing players to the ground, and Owen flew backward into a pile of bones, wearing them like a broken backpack. Jonah should have run. Instead, he grabbed the bell heart's chain, let the guardian lunge at his heartbeat, and pulled off the belt at the very last second. The whole party saw him hanging directly above the monster's head, grinning like an idiot. Then he vanished and swung away. The guardian struck the last place it had seen him, its knife arm hitting the chain, dropping the bell heart onto its own skull. Grace saw the opening and threw her spear, pinning both its arms to the wall in one motion. Owen, still wearing bones, charged and hit the bell heart like he was ringing the world's ugliest gong. Jonah climbed onto its back and clipped Harper's wires around its neck, jumped down, and pulled with everything he had. The bell heart shook the monster apart, and it exploded into silver dust. The chest appeared behind Jonah this time, not behind Grace. Inside was a thin loop of dark leather, colder than the surrounding air. Skill acquired, forgotten waste. A name spoken while hidden would fade from short-term memory, and that skill would soon turn Trevor into a very different kind of threat. 2 nights later, Trevor returned with a smaller, meaner crew and captured 10 workers at the southern quarry. Send the ghost, or we break people, was his demand because he still did not know Jonah's name. Grace wanted to attack directly. Owen wanted to attack louder. Jonah had a better idea and walked straight into the camp before sunset just to listen. Trevor had gotten smarter. Chalk dust to reveal movement, bells on strings, trained dogs. A man dragging a rake to check for footprints. 2 weeks earlier, that would have stopped him cold. Now the weightless strap ignored dust and dirt entirely, and the silent buckle swallowed every bell before it could ring true. He stood right beside Trevor and listened to the man explain his own trap in perfect detail. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Trevor says drop your weapons." Forgotten waste activated, and one follower actually lowered his sword. "Trevor says release the prisoners," Jonah whispered from the other side of camp, and Tamor began cutting ropes. Trevor's face changed as his own orders unraveled around him. "Trevor says run in circles." "Trevor says slap the guy next to you." "Trevor says the chain blade is haunted." The entire camp dissolved into confusion. A disciplined group can survive a ghost. A paranoid group cannot survive a ghost using their leader's own voice. While they turned on each other, Jonah opened every cage and freed every prisoner, stacking stolen gear onto a cart. Owen charged in from the road, making enough noise for an entire army, and Grace took the ridge with her spear. Trevor finally attacked, swinging his chain blade wide, and the third sweep wrapped around Jonah's arm before he could dodge it. Trevor smiled, believing he had finally caught the ghost. Jonah smiled back, because the chain was now attached to him, and he stepped backward, straight over the safe zone line he had spent all afternoon guiding him toward. Blue chains erupted with more force than Jonah had ever seen, wrapping Trevor's arms, legs, chest, and throat in front of the entire quarry. "I was going to make you chase a chicken into town," Jonah said, breathing hard, blood running down his arm. Trevor spat at him, but the belt clicked back on halfway through, and it missed completely. The guards dragged him to jail, while Ashford celebrated like the nightmare was finally over. Jonah did not celebrate, because Trevor had smiled before the cell door closed, and men like him never smile unless they think they left a knife somewhere. For a while, life almost felt like progress. Ashford grew, new routes opened, and Harper's Forge became the busiest place in town. Grace formed a proper defense group, not quite a guild, more like people tired of dying stupidly. Jonah became a rumor with a waist size, the empty player. He hated the name for about 5 minutes, then heard a criminal whisper it outside the gate, and turn around instead of attacking, and decided the name could live. His belt kept evolving in strange directions, never raw damage, never a big flashy attack, only ways to become less present and more unfair. Pocket Loop let him tuck small objects into a fold nobody noticed, coins, potions, keys, and once, very briefly, a live frog. Then came Double Tuck, the ridiculous one, letting him produce a temporary duplicate of any simple item for 10 minutes. Harper called it impossible. Owen called it snack science after Jonah duplicated a meat pie and changed his entire religion. It could not copy legendary weapons, people, or living creatures except for the frog incident, which nobody was ever allowed to discuss again. The hollow mill opened during a rainstorm, a rotating tower full of grinding gears and monsters made of wet straw. The objective was to stop the millstone before it crushed the town's water channel. Inside were thousands of cursed onions, and the straw monsters hated strong smells more than anything else in the world. Jonah looked at the onions, looked at his belt, and looked at the army of monsters blocking the stairs, and made a decision that would follow him for weeks. He duplicated sack after sack, kicking them into gears, stuffing them into monster mouths, launching them from slings made of Harper's wire. The straw monsters staggered around crying sap while Grace cut through them, trying very hard not to laugh. Owen wore onion skins like war paint and declared himself the farmer of doom. At the top, the boss waited inside the main gear, a giant scarecrow with a spinning saw wheel for a halo, turning the room into a blender. Jonah tied one end of a rope to the gear, one end to the boss's ankle, and the middle to every loose sack of onions he could find. For 3 glorious seconds, the boss became the center of the world's dumbest tornado. Grace threw her spear through the opening, and Owen slammed the emergency brake with his entire body. The millstone stopped 1 inch before crushing the water channel. Jonah's reward was a pale belt thread called Laughing Seam, making anything he moved seem natural for 1 extra second after he let go. 1 second is nothing. 1 second is also enough to make a thrown knife look like it came from an enemy's own hand. The following month belonged to consequences. Trevor's scattered followers stopped gathering in obvious places and learned to watch for flour, chalk, bells, and dogs. That made Jonah proud, not because they were smarter, but because every defense against him was a defense they weren't using against everyone else. He duplicated keys to free trapped players from a bathhouse full of steam monsters, then spread soap across the courtyard for the criminals chasing them. Guards found 8 armed men sliding in circles, attacking the air, confessing to crimes nobody had even asked about. Another group built an illegal toll gate from fallen logs. So Jonah duplicated their own signs and pointed every one of them toward their own camp, labeled free loot. By dawn, every hungry monster in the area had followed the signs, and the toll group ran into Ashford begging for jail cells with actual walls. A third group rigged an ambush with dry leaves, bells, and tripwire. Assuming Jonah still had to move across the ground like a normal person, he climbed through the branches above them instead, tying every tripwire to every belt, pouch, and weapon grip they owned, then threw a single pebble. The entire ambush attacked itself. The first time Jonah lost, it was against Grace, not in a real fight in training. "I want to know if I can hit you," she said, standing alone in the practice yard with her eyes closed. She hit him 5 times out of 10, without ever seeing him at all. That terrified him more than any monster. "You rely on people being stupid," she told him, "and it will fail against someone patient." He hated hearing it, and hated more that she was right. So he trained not with swords, with stillness, learning to breathe only when the wind moved, to stand where attention already avoided looking. Invisibility was never about disappearing. It was about becoming the thing nobody wanted to think about. The system rewarded that lesson with a new skill, blind spot step, letting him skip from one ignored space to another in a single heartbeat. The next major challenge arrived with the Crimson Garden, a dungeon of flowers with teeth and vines that drank magic. The reward was a spring crystal that could protect Ashford's farms from monster blight, and without it, food would become the town's next enemy. The garden separated the entire party within minutes, walls of red vines cutting them into scattered groups. For most players, it was a maze. For Jonah, it was a playground with murder plants. He found Grace fighting the garden knight, a monster made of layered petals carrying a thorn lance. The spring crystal caged in roots behind it. Instead of stealing the crystal directly, he stole the cage itself, piece by piece, replacing living roots with fake rope while she kept the knight busy. When the cage finally collapsed, he caught the crystal, dropped a duplicated fruit in its place, and walked away unseen. The garden knight turned to protect its prize and found nothing worth protecting. Grace drove her spear through its chest in that exact pause, and it exploded into petals. "Jonah," she said quietly afterward, and for half a second his name did not fade at all. She remembered. He did not know how he felt about that. Back in Ashford, the crystal turned dead farms green overnight, and for the first time, people celebrated something he had done without ever knowing he did it. A praise you cannot receive is a strange thing to carry. He started removing the belt more often after that, letting Harper see him, letting Owen drag him into meals, letting Grace ask about his limits without a joke every time. Mockery faded into caution. Caution faded into curiosity. Curiosity became request. Could the empty player check a missing group, find a boss weakness, scare a bully straight? That last one became his specialty, because evil people hate to things more than punishment. Being confused, and being watched by everyone while confused. Then came the night of the broken jail. Trevor had swallowed a shard of monster crystal before his capture, feeding it with his own blood for weeks, disgusting and effective in equal measure. When a black storm hit Ashford, the shard awakened and burned straight through his cell lock. Half the prisoners were loose by the time Jonah reached the corridor. This was not a prank situation anymore. This was surgery. He barricaded doors with leaning shields, tripped escaping criminals with duplicated rope, and whispered false orders in Trevor's own stolen voice. Half his followers ran left into the laundry room. The other half ran right into the evidence cage, and Jonah locked both doors behind them. Trevor felt his plan unraveling around him, thread by thread, and finally spoke Jonah's actual name aloud. Someone had said it in front of him before, and forgotten ways could not erase a name someone already hated with that much focus. "I do not need to see you," Trevor said, swinging his chain blade in a wide spiral through the corridor. It clipped Jonah's shoulder even through blind spot step, pain flashing white as he bit his tongue to stay silent. He backed toward the front doors, removed the belt just long enough to be seen, then dropped flat the instant Trevor lunged. The chain blade flew past him and wrapped around the iron statue in the town square. Protected property under the safe zone rules. Blue chains erupted with twice the force Jonah had ever witnessed, pinning Trevor to the statue in front of the entire crowd rushing to fight the storm. "You hide because you are weak," Trevor snarled. "No," Jonah answered, stepping closer. "I hide because people like you show your real faces only when you think nobody is watching." The monster storm ended before dawn, and Ashford survived. When Jonah walked through the square without his belt afterward, nobody laughed anymore. They stared instead, and that felt worse. Respect is heavier than mockery, and it asks you what you plan to do with it next. He did not know yet. The system answered for him by dropping a nightmare on the whole region. The Black Tower appeared beyond the northern forest, tall enough to split the clouds, with a spiral path wrapping around the outside. Ascend the Sky Needle, the window read, top floor reward, city anchor. Failure within 30 days releases a roaming calamity. A city anchor meant Ashford could expand its protection to farms and outer roads. A roaming calamity meant something enormous, and angry would wander the region, until everything became a footnote. So everyone prepared. Jonah trained differently, collecting rope, chalk, nails, hinges, sticky sap, bell clappers, and onion powder, because history mattered. "You are going to fight a tower with garbage," Harper said, staring at his pile. "It is curated garbage," he answered, and she added 3 spring-loaded clips to it without another word. "Everyone else is going to climb the tower," Jonah told Grace. "I'm going to make the tower regret having objects." The first floor proved him right instantly. A giant armored beetle blocked the path, its shell reflecting every attack, growing more dangerous the more it was hit. Nobody looks under a giant beetle, not even the beetle. Jonah crawled beneath it and rigged smoke pellets into its wing joints, tying the wires to one of Owen's dropped clubs. The beetle stepped on the club, the wires pulled, smoke exploded, and its wings snapped open to reveal soft crystal underneath. Grace's spear finished the job, and the beetle shattered into blue glass. On the second floor, doors shifted randomly on hinges that changed shape depending on destination. Jonah simply removed the hinges, and the players called it a lucky stabilization event. Harper called it vandalism with benefits. The third floor's boss split into smaller copies whenever it was damaged. So, Jonah lured every fragment into empty potion jars, duplicated the jars into decoys, and let it confuse itself completely. By floor 7, the tower stopped feeling like a dungeon and started feeling like a machine built to grind arrogance into dust. Every floor punished direct power, and every floor rewarded calm, patient observation. Players who once mocked Jonah's belt began asking where to stand before every fight. On the 8th floor, waiting nearly killed them all. A transparent wind serpent sensed pressure changes instead of sight, and it struck Jonah before he even got within 10 feet. Its tail slammed into his ribs, throwing him across the arena. And for 1 second the impact loosened his belt in front of everyone. Hiding from eyes did nothing against a creature that hunted absence itself. So he hid inside attention, ripping open every pocket of feathers and smoke pellets until the entire arena filled with tiny, false movements. The serpent's senses overloaded, striking cloth and dust while Jonah climbed onto its spine and looped wires through its own glowing ribs. It tied itself into a knot trying to escape, and Grace drove her spear into the center, while Owen leaped from a broken pillar to finish it. The wind serpent burst, and the entire tower went quiet for 10 full seconds. "You adapted," Grace said afterward, helping him stand. "I panicked with accessories," he answered. "Same thing, apparently." The climb continued through floors of illusions, gravity wells, and singing statues that Jonah simply rearranged until their songs canceled each other out. Floor 12 brought trouble of a different kind. A rival group from another safe zone trying to steal Ashford's supplies. Under the excuse of leadership, Jonah swapped their real food for stone-filled crates while their leader lectured everyone about how power decides who eats first. He returned the stolen goods publicly, dropping bread, cheese, and 1 dramatic onion straight from nowhere into the leader's own backpack, in front of a growing crowd. "Swing now, prove them right," Jonah whispered, and the man did exactly that, drawing his weapon on a rest platform where combat was forbidden. Chains wrapped him instantly, and his own followers stepped away, suddenly very interested in fairness. On floor 15, a house-sized treasure mimic swallowed 5 fighters before Grace managed to pin its lid shut. Jonah slipped behind it, hid one of its false hinges, and jumped straight into its open stomach to rescue the missing players. Inside, everything wanted to be found, and his belt drank the noise, granting a strange new skill. Nobody's claim, making unattended objects belong to no one at all. He duplicated a bag of the mimic's own gold, threw the copies down its throat, and watched it choke on treasure that technically did not exist. Grace cut it open from outside, Owen pulled the swallowed players free, and Jonah crawled out covered in slime holding the real reward high above his head. Nobody's claim changed everything after that. He could touch stolen weapons in a bandit hideout and make them slide out of criminal hands, like wet soap, leaving armed men suddenly holding nothing but empty fist. At floor 20, the tower revealed a black gate allowing only 10 players inside, and Jonah was not on Grace's original list. He walked through it anyway before anyone could stop him. The arena boss, the Thunder Butcher, hunted unseen movement by sensing pressure changes, and Jonah's invisibility became a liability for the first time. Wearing the belt made the boss attack empty space. Removing it made the boss attack him directly. So he made everyone invisible to it instead, scattering feathers and duplicated cloaks across the entire arena, until absence existed everywhere at once. Every time the Thunder Butcher raised a cleaver, it struck a falling cloak instead of a fighter, buying the team precious seconds again and again. When its final lightning attack charged, Jonah pulled off his belt and stood directly in front of it, shouting to draw its full attention. Then he vanished under its arm at the last instant, leaving a stolen mimic lid propped between two iron spikes in his place. The lightning struck the lid, bounced through the storm chains above, and came down through the Thunder Butcher's own horns. It exploded into nothing, and the gate opened, revealing a reward with no shine and no weight. A black leather segment called Unseen Authority. System tracking reduced while hidden. It read not removed, reduced. The ranking board no longer knew what to do with him, flickering between Jonah, unknown, and blank. That hesitation made him more dangerous than ever before. Not the loud kind of monster. The kind that wins before the enemy understands the game has even started. Other safe zones began sending messages after that, begging for help along blocked roads and poison wells. Ashford could not save everyone. So Jonah started saving the ones on the way in the most unreasonable ways possible. At a broken bridge, he tricked a gang into fighting monsters meant for someone else, using nobody's claim to erase their ownership marks entirely. At a black pond, he built a raft from duplicated potion bottles and walked across the water invisible, luring a water beast into confusion long enough for Grace to strike. At an old theater dungeon, he wrecked every dramatic moment of a forced performance until the audience monsters booed their own boss to death. Harper called that one arts. Grace called it disturbing. Owen asked if they could do it again. They could not, because floor 25 opened with Trevor's revenge. The crystal shard growing inside him had never stopped spreading, and it finally burst free, twisting the surrounding prisoners into half-monster followers. He ambushed the team on the Hall of Falling Stars, a long glass bridge under a sky of burning meteors, dragging hostages to the very edge. "Come out, Jonah," he shouted, and this time Jonah did. He removed the belt and walked forward with both hands raised, letting Trevor's eyes lock onto his face while wires spread unseen. Across the glass floor behind him, a meteor struck, heating the scattered glass, and Jonah snapped his belt back on the instant Trevor's attention slipped for one heartbeat. The whole bridge glittered like a broken galaxy as the wires yanked every shard into the air, and Grace and Owen moved through the confusion to free the hostages. Trevor charged straight at the empty space where Jonah had vanished, chain blades screaming through the air in unpredictable arcs. Jonah stopped dodging and let the chain wrap tight around his waist, expecting to be dragged into the open. Instead, nobody's claim activated, and for one breath the chain belonged to no one at all, sliding off him like a coin through fingers. Trevor overbalanced completely and stumbled straight into the path of a falling star. Jonah almost let it hit him. He wanted to, but a villain killed by fate becomes a legend, and Jonah wanted him small and seen. So he pushed Trevor toward the safe restraint circle instead. Blue chains erupted through black crystal and pinned him flat to the glass, the falling star burning away half his weapon without ever touching his life. "You kept saying I was weak because I hide," Jonah said, standing over him. "But you only attack people you think cannot fight back, so tell me, which one of us was hiding?" Trevor had no answer. He was dragged back to Ashford and sealed in a crystal cell built above ground this time, where everyone could see him, and nobody had to pretend fear made him powerful. But the black shard fragments collected from his chain pulsed, whenever pointed toward the top of the tower, a calamity sleeping right where the climb led. They had 5 days left. Ashford split into two kinds of people that week. One sharpening weapons and practicing heroic poses, and one's counting bandages, watching the gate like it was already a mouth. Jonah belonged to a third kind, walking invisible through the streets, listening. Because trouble always talks too loudly when it thinks nobody useful is nearby. He found 3 disasters trying to be born at once, starting with the group blocking the Western Supply Road with a fake toll and a kneeling prisoner, forced to beg for his life. Jonah stole the lightning whip straight out of a bully's hand using nobody's claim, tied it to a tree branch, and let it yank him upside down by his own ankle. He dropped bronze bells into their sacks and wagons, then removed his belt for one breath to wave at all 6 of them from a rooftop. "Miss me?" he asked, and a thrown fire spear struck a protected arch instead of him, triggering chains that wrapped the entire group before guards even arrived. The rescued prisoner pointed at the empty road and said simply, "The belt guy happened." It was the first time anyone said it without laughing. The second disaster was worse. 3 black crystals pulsing on Harper's workbench, remnants of the old tower's sickness scattered before the apocalypse even began. If enough of them woke, Ashford would spend its final day being chewed from every side while the climb team fought above. The clouds. They could not be smashed, because they screamed loud enough to summon everything with teeth for miles. At the first buried beacon, Jonah lowered a rope of stolen monster ears and Hammond to a well full of horned wolves, luring every predator down into the dark. Harper slammed an iron lid over the well and locked it, sealing the beacon's scream inside with 3 angry wolves and the worst dinner party in history. At the second beacon, hidden beneath the schoolhouse, Jonah moved 1 inch at a time past paper birds that hunted air pressure instead of sight. Owen banged pans together screaming that he was a storm, drawing every bird toward himself while Jonah drew chalk lines to sever the beacon's roots from every book in the room. He stuffed the freed beacon into Owen's lucky wooden duck and threw it out the window, straight into Harper's waiting suppression box. The third beacon sat beneath Ashford's own fountain, connected to the water everyone had been drinking since the very first day. It did not make monsters. It made rumors. On the fourth morning, the entire town sounded like a jar full of angry bees, whispers turning friends into enemies over lies nobody could trace back to a single source. Jonah realized he had been thinking too small with his gift for erasing memory, and started walking through the crowd asking quiet questions instead of insults. "Who told you that?" he asked one player, and the answer was always the same: "I don't remember." Every rumor lost its root the moment someone had to name where it came from. The fountain water turned black as the beacon's power weakened, and Harper jammed iron rods into the stone corners while Gray struck the water with lightning. Owen threw his entire sack of monster ears into the fountain for reasons nobody fully understood, and black water exploded upward in a shape like a screaming face. Jonah jumped in, belt and all, grabbed the beacon from its nest of black threads at the bottom, and rose from the water holding it high above the crowd. Gray struck it midair, and Harper's box swallowed the pieces before they could scream even once. The square went quiet, and then someone finally asked the obvious question. Why would Grace abandon a city she had saved 11 times? Nobody had an answer, because the fear had never been real to begin with. That night, someone stole Jonah's face, not literally, but a stranger wrapped a brown strap around his waist and started demanding supplies from scared merchants using his name. Jonah watched the imposter from a rooftop, his fake belt too shiny, his scarf far too dramatic, standing directly under lantern light while claiming to be invisible. The disrespect hurt almost as much as the crime itself. He followed the fake to an abandoned bathhouse, removed his own belt just long enough for the man's helpers to see his real face, and let panic do the rest. He scattered duplicated brown straps across the room, whispering wrong and warmer from every direction until the imposter could no longer tell which belt was truly his. Owen burst in wrapped in a towel, announcing a bathhouse inspection, and Grace arrived through the back door with the net launcher borrowed from Harper. The fake tripped over Jonah's outstretched foot, slid across the wet tiles, and landed directly beneath Grace's net. "Do not use my name to scare children," Jonah told him, removing the belt one final time so the whole room could see exactly who had caught him. After that night, something shifted across the entire region. A pickpocket returned stolen wallets and apologized to the wind. A cheating gambler's loaded die rolled upward into an invisible hand and landed directly on his own tongue. Fear can be ugly, but when bad people fear being watched while good people can finally breathe, it becomes something closer to justice. The next morning, the tower entrance turned silver, and a hidden door appeared beside the main gate, half buried in roots. Optional challenge path available. The window read reward, ascent advantage. 12 doors waited inside a round chamber beneath the tower, each painted with a different symbol. A sword, a shield, a spear, a bow, a chain, and one plain brown rectangle that barely looked like a belt at all. Choose the door that represents your strength, the room announced, and Jonah hated it immediately. The belt door was too clean, too obvious, and the tower loved punishing obvious answers. He crouched instead and found a 13th symbol scratched into the stone floor by someone's fingernail long ago, an empty circle representing nothing at all. His strength was never the belt itself. It was the space people ignored until it was already too late. He pressed his palm onto the empty circle, and every door unlocked at once. "That feels like cheating," Owen whispered. "It feels like him," Grace answered. With limited time, Jonah ran through every hallway stealing small useful pieces instead of completing each trial properly. Hinge pins, padding, warm rocks, shadow strips, and every lace from the boot hallway. At the center chamber, 12 rewards merged into one, and the system struggled to categorize a man who belonged to every path and none of them. Skill strengthened, pocket loop, it finally announced, capacity increased. Duplicate duration increased. "You are now officially a trash dragon," Owen declared, staring at the pile of stolen junk around Jonah's feet. It was the most accurate compliment anyone had ever given him. The advantage opened a hidden lift by passing several broken stair routes, stopping at a rest level that felt far too calm to be trusted. A rival group stumbled and dragging to prisoners, shoving and starving them just carefully enough to avoid triggering the safe line's combat chains. Jonah swapped the prisoner's monster bait pouch for a copy hidden under their leader's own cloak, letting his detection ring point straight back at himself. "It knows," Jonah whispered, and the leader tore off his own cloak in a panic, scattering his followers into confused suspicion. Grace planted her spear between his grabbing hand and a free prisoner, and the safe line counted his grip on her weapon as a hostile act. Chains snapped around him instantly, leaving his own followers to free the prisoners themselves while their leader sat restrained for the tower guards to collect. When one free player asked how to repay him, Jonah gave an answer that surprised even himself. When someone weaker than you needs help, don't ask if it's convenient, he said, then quickly added, also, never trust a calm rest area, they're smug. By the third day before the deadline, half of Ashford had started copying his tricks: decoy belts, fake pouches, bags of flour, bells tied to shields to lure monsters the wrong way. Jonah watched from a rooftop as new players handled the charging beast, without a single legendary attack, using nothing but cloaks, bells, and hot stones. For once, his greatest skill was not hiding himself. It was making everyone else harder to hurt. The world punished that growth almost immediately with a giant underground centipede, drawn by leftover beacon energy leaking through the quarry soil. Legendary weapons bounced uselessly off its black plates while Jonah climbed onto its back and poured out everything he had collected from the optional path. Every stolen object bounced along its armor, and the creature felt dozens of tiny impacts, curling defensively exactly the way he had hoped. He used Nobody's Claim on the quarry crane locks, guiding loose chains across its own leg hooks as it curled tighter and tighter into a knot. Pull the ugly shoelace, Owen shouted, and half the fighters obeyed instantly, hauling the crane chains until the centipede folded itself into its own trap. Grace drove her spear into the central joint while Harper fired reinforced braces from a launcher like giant staples, holding the whole knot in place. Jonah touched the largest armor plate and made it forget the centipede entirely, just long enough for Grace's lightning to slide underneath and finish it completely. That night, Harper used pieces of its armor to reinforce Jonah's belt, threading black strips through the brown leather until it hummed with new durability. "Did you just upgrade my belt with bug armor?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I hate that it works." A regional supply bloom appeared the next morning, a temporary field of rare herbs and crystals just beyond the southern woods, and Jonah went ahead alone to check for danger. He found an ambush hidden in the tree line within a minute: nets, sleeping darts, and rope traps aimed at Ashford's incoming harvest team. He moved every trap to face its own owner, hung sleep spore mushrooms above their heads, and dropped a single bronze bell onto the leader's skull to trigger the whole thing early. The harvest team watched 6 criminals cocoon themselves in their own nets and fall asleep hanging upside down from a tree. 2 more fled straight into a field of monstrous silver wheat that shook every stolen item loose from their pockets before guards arrived to collect them. The harvest succeeded completely, gathering enough food and crystals to supply the entire final climb. Across the region, people started using one phrase whenever something impossible happened to cruel people. They said they got emptied. Jonah pretended to hate the phrase. Secretly, he loved it. That night he sat alone on the city wall with the belt off, letting the wind hit his face like an ordinary person for the first time in weeks. Below him, frightened newcomers kept glancing up, then looking embarrassed when he waved. People who would have laughed at his belt only a week earlier. Mockery is simple. You survive it out of spite. Respect is heavier, because people place hope in your hands, and dropping it becomes a whole new way to hurt them. "Do not make me responsible for everybody," he whispered to the night. "You already are," Grace said, 3 steps away, having learned to find him by listening for the exact place silence tried to hard. "The final climb will not be like the other floors," she told him, and asked if he believed he could face it. "I believe I can make their lives harder," he finally said. "The monsters, the murderers, anyone who looks at a weak person and sees free loot. That is enough," she said quietly, and maybe it truly was. The final morning began with rain that never touched the ground, black drops hanging in the air, darkening one by one until the countdown reached its end. A child stepped forward before the climb team left and handed Jonah a small cloth pouch, chalk sticks, string, buttons, and a single wrapped cookie. "For traps," the boy said, and Jonah tied the pouch to his belt, promising to save the cookie for the final boss. The gate opened, and the team stepped into the tower for the last time. The first hidden danger was not a monster, but a hallway of invisible applause that grew louder with every prideful pose, and opened the floor beneath anyone who wanted to look heroic. Jonah rolled the child's buttons across the floor, and the hallway's hunger for performance chased tiny clicking sounds instead of exhausted, crawling players. At the end, a floating mask made of smiles and knife-edged lashes bowed toward them, waiting for a dramatic attack that never came. Jonah placed the child's cookie on the ground and let it settle with perfect, natural importance, and the mask dove after its own audience straight into the spikes below. "That cookie died a hero," Owen said solemnly, and Jonah saluted the hole where the mask had disappeared. The next chamber held cages of dead players' equipment, Weapons that screamed the moment anyone tried to force the key hanging protected at its center. Jonah whispered to the jealous weapons instead, calling them boring, scattering brighter scraps of metal to steal their attention until the key's chain finally loosened. Grace threw her spear without even looking, clipping the chain and dropping the key straight into Jonah's waiting hands. A stairwell beyond led outside the tower itself, where a sky crawler made of cloud and bone rose from the black rain and began inhaling the entire staircase. Jonah was pulled off his feet, and at the last second dumped every scrap of flour, chalk, and feathers he carried straight into its open throat. It choked on meaningless trash, coughing him back out like a human spitball, and Owen caught his ankle midair, slamming him safely onto the stairs. Grace's spear pierced its jaw in the opening that followed, and the whole team fought with a messy, desperate teamwork that felt more beautiful than any pride ever had. The last chamber before the true final floor was a vault of broken banners, whispering doubts that attacked the tired and the frightened first. Jonah removed his belt and answered every whisper by tying copy brown straps to the banners themselves, listing every ridiculous, impossible thing his plain belt had already survived. Laughter filled the room where fear had wanted silence, and the banners, unable to stand it, wrapped themselves into knots and dropped from the ceiling like defeated laundry. Tidal resonance increased. A message told him alone. Unseen authority strengthened when acting against hostile attention. He put the belt back on, and for once, when the team watched him vanish, nobody looked confused at all. The final climb turned brutal almost immediately. Ice that reflected sound, statues that only moved when praised, firefish that fought over stolen territory. Floor after floor solved not with strength, but with patience and small, ridiculous tricks. Floor 29 was worse than any of them, silent, dark, and slowly stealing memories from every player climbing its endless staircase. Owen forgot the word for club and called it a friendship stick. Grace forgot Jonah's name for 3 full seconds and looked horrified the moment it returned. The staircase was not attacking bodies. It was attacking identity itself. People can survive losing facts, Jonah realized, but they cannot survive losing purpose. So he removed his belt, stood where everyone could see him, and pointed upward with nothing but one simple instruction: follow the plain belt. When the stairs stole names, they still remembered to follow the belt. When they forgot fear, they followed. When Jonah forgot his own name for one cold second, he looked down at his waist and remembered enough. Comfortable fit. The same dumb description that had started everything. He laughed so hard the memory fog cracked apart around him, and the staircase simply did not know what to do with a man laughing at his own equipment. They reached the top. The final platform floated wider than Ashford's own town square, a crystal pillar wrapped in silver vines standing at its center. Behind it slept the Calamity, not a dragon, not a demon king, but a hollow giant built from old battlefields, broken weapons, and empty helmets, called the Carrion Colossus. It woke the moment they stepped onto the platform. Thousands of stolen weapons hanging from its body like feathers. A face of smooth metal with no eyes and no mouth. Every fighter charged instantly, and every attack simply vanished into the weapons covering its body, absorbed like offerings to a hungry god. It raised one hand, lifted every abandoned weapon on the platform into the air, and fired them all at once. Jonah moved without thinking, touching loose weapons one by one, stealing their ownership from the Colossus for a single heartbeat each, dropping swords and shields out of the sky. "Can you reach the anchor?" Grace asked, bleeding from the forehead. And Jonah looked past the monster at the glowing pillar 30 yards away. "Probably," he said, and Owen translated instantly. "That means yes in Jonah language." The plan was simple: distract the Colossus, claim the anchor. Simple plans are lies with good posture. The moment Jonah moved, the Colossus turned toward him, not seeing him, but noticing that the world itself did not. A wall of blades flew straight at the empty space he occupied, and Blind Spot's step burned through his stamina, jumping from shadow to shadow. With every heartbeat a coin tossed between genius and death. A rusted chain wrapped around his ankle, halfway to the anchor, part of the Colossus itself, dragging him backward across the platform. His belt nearly snapped open on impact, flickering visible for one full second in front of the entire fighting crowd. The Colossus lifted him into the air, close to its blank, featureless face. And for the first time since the very beginning, Jonah was not hidden, clever, or controlling anything at all. He was bait on a hook. Then he looked at all the legendary weapons stuck across its body. Every glowing sword and dragon shield people had once fought over in a white room, all collected like trophies. And there he was, held by a rusty chain, wearing the plainest belt in the entire apocalypse. He started laughing, not because it was funny, because he finally understood the fight completely. The Colossus did not collect people. It collected attention, absorbing anything impressive, dramatic, or glowing faster the more famous it looked. His belt had survived this long precisely because it looked worthless. The monster was a graveyard for legends, so he gave it garbage instead. Pocket loop opened wider than it ever had, dumping rope, onions, bottles, bent nails, old shoes, chalk dust, soap bars, wire clips, and one angry frog he still refused to explain. Then he activated double tuck again and again, until the belt burned against his own waist, copies exploding outward in every direction across the sky. The Colossus froze, its body unable to decide what deserved to be absorbed among 600 duplicated onions and a rain of falling shoes. That hesitation belonged entirely to Jonah. Nobody's claim spread through the chain around his ankle, making it forget the Colossus completely. And he slipped free, falling into blind spot steps' protective shadow. Grace saw the opening instantly, cutting the anchor's outer locks instead of attacking the monster directly. Owen swung from a flying shield and crashed into its distracted knee, and the whole team abandoned their flashiest skills for rocks, boots, broken wood, and cooking pots. For the first time, the carrion Colossus stepped back. Jonah reached the anchor, warm and humming with power, and a prompt appeared, "Claim City Anchor." He reached out, and the Colossus moved, its chest opening to reveal the same black storm heart that had twisted Trevor from the inside out. A beam of dark lightning formed, aimed not at Jonah, but directly at the anchor itself. If it could not own the city, it would destroy the prize entirely. He had 1 second, one ignored object, one stupid idea left. He pulled off his belt completely. The world saw him. The Colossus saw him. Every player on the platform watched the empty player stand fully visible beside the anchor, holding the plain brown belt that had fooled towns, dungeons, killers, and bosses alike. Then he threw the belt directly into the beam. For half a breath, he was completely visible and completely powerless. The beam struck the belt, and its dumb little description flared brighter than the sun. Comfortable fit. It did not block the attack like a shield. It did something far worse. It made the beam unimportant. The black lightning lost its own attention, dimmed, wavered, and slid harmlessly off the belt into faded, powerless sparks. Jonah grabbed the belt as it fell, snapped it back around his waist, and slammed his hand onto the anchor. Claim accepted, the system announced. City anchor secured. The crystal pillar erupted with silver light, and instead of striking the Colossus, the light simply ignored it entirely. And that was exactly what destroyed it. The carrion Colossus was built from stolen attention and borrowed fear, and when the anchor's light refused to acknowledge it, the monster began to come apart at every seam. Weapons fell from its body, swords clattering, shields cracking, rings going dark, flame cloaks burning out, holy armor folding like empty cans. It reached for Jonah one last time, and he stepped forward, visible entirely by choice. Not because he needed to be seen, but because it needed to know exactly who had beaten it. He touched its blank face and activated Nobody's Claim one final time. For one heartbeat, the monster owned nothing at all, not its weapons, not its storm, not even itself. It collapsed into a rain of rust and black dust, falling through the clouds long before it ever reached the world below. The platform went completely silent. Then Owen started cheering so loudly the tower practically shook, and Grace sat down like her own bones had finally given up. The city anchor's light shot downward through the clouds, racing along the tower, spreading across the forest, the roads, the farms, and finally reaching Ashford itself. Far below, walls of silver light rose around the outer fields, and watchtowers repaired themselves in seconds. The town became a true city not because someone gave a speech, but because a group of exhausted people climbed a nightmare tower and buried a god of weapons and garbage. Final contribution calculated, the window announced. Most valuable player, Jonah. No unknowns, no blanks, his name stayed exactly where it belonged. The ranking board rose above the platform, visible to the entire region. Rank 1, Jonah, starter equipment, plain belt, title acquired, the empty player. Owen laughed until he nearly fell off the edge of the platform, and Grace smiled like she had been waiting for the board to finally admit what she already knew. Jonah felt proud and strange, both at once. For so long he had won by staying unseen. Now the whole region knew his name, and a joke had somehow become a warning. And that warning had quietly become a target. That night, the city celebrated properly, lanterns floating over every street, players trading stories that made no sense unless you had actually lived through them. A child asked if he really beat the final monster using nothing but a belt. He beat it with trash first, Owen shouted from across the square before Jonah could even answer. Fine, Jonah admitted, but it was high-quality trash. Harper repaired the belt in silence that night. Burn marks from the Colossus's beam still darkening the leather, the buckle cracked, the seam twitching whenever anyone said the word onion. It's uglier now, she finally said, handing it back. Is that bad? Jonah asked. No, she answered. It suits you. From Harper, that was practically a hug. Grace found him on the city wall before dawn, watching the expanded safe zone shimmer across fields that had been death traps only days before. You could lead people now, she said quietly. That sounds terrible, he answered. It usually is, she agreed, but they will follow whether you want them to or not. Below them, Owen taught new players to dodge by throwing turnips at them. Harper's forged chimney smoked steadily, and guards changed shifts near a jail that finally felt secure. Trevor's crystal cell sat visible in the yard, empty of myth, still angry, still powerless behind the light. For once, the whole city felt like it could finally breathe. Jonah wanted that to be enough. The system waited until sunrise to interrupt his peace one last time. A black window opened far beyond the protected roads, above a valley none of them had ever explored. New region discovered, it read, the silent expanse, anchor signal received, distant gates awakening. Grace stood beside him, reading in silence. Is that good or bad? Owen shouted from below. Nobody answered right away. The belt tightened around Jonah's waist on its own, comfortable, ready, and annoyingly dramatic as always. Everyone had picked legendary weapons because they wanted to be seen. Jonah had picked a plain belt because there was nothing else left to choose. Now entire gates were waking up in the distance, because Ashford had become a light in a dark world. And somewhere out there, bigger monsters, crueler players, and dumber opportunities were already waiting for him. He looked at the valley, then back at the city behind him, glowing under its new silver walls. He had no throne, no army, no glowing sword, just a belt, a bad habit of standing exactly where evil people least wanted him, and a talent for turning cruelty into its own trap. The empty player did not need to be seen to matter. He had proven that from the very first day, when a merchant looked straight through him and forgot to charge him for bread. He had proven it in a burrow, tying a monster's own headpiece to a root. He had proven it in an orchard, freeing prisoners while their captors slept beside the fire. He had proven it on a bridge, turning boulders into scattered rubble with nothing but iron pots and inches. He had proven it in a mill, drowning a scarecrow boss in an army of onions. He had proven it in a garden, stealing a cage piece by piece while its owner never once looked down. He had proven it in a cathedral, ringing a bell heart loud enough to shatter a guardian's every ear. He had proven it against a tyrant with a chain blade twice, using nothing but the man's own voice against him. He had proven it beneath a fountain, defeating a beacon not with a weapon, but with simple, patient questions. He had proven it against an entire tower, floor after floor, turning traps, banners, statues, and storms into stepping stones. And he had proven it against a god built from stolen legends, burying it under garbage until it forgot what it even was. Every single person who had ever laughed at his belt had unknowingly handed him practice. Every insult had become material. Every doubt had become a tool. That was the secret nobody in the White Room had understood on the very first day. Power was never about how loud you looked. It was about what you were willing to do when nobody was watching. Jonah had chosen comfort, not glory, and comfort had carried him further than any sword ever could. The belt around his waist had no shine, no aura, no dramatic reveal. It simply worked, quietly, patiently, exactly the way he had learned to work himself. Grace watched him staring at the horizon, and asked if he was afraid of what waited in the silent expanse. A little, he admitted. Good, she said. That means you're paying attention. Owen climbed up beside them, breathless from running the whole way up the wall stairs. So are we doing this? He asked. Are we going into the scary new valley? Jonah looked at the distant red flash on the horizon, then at the city behind him, safe, glowing, and full of people who no longer laughed at him for the wrong reasons. Somebody has to, he said. Might as well be the guy nobody notices until it's too late. Harper joined them last, wiping soot from her hands, and asked flatly what the plan was this time. Same as always, Jonah answered. Be ignored, be patient, and let cruelty build its own trap. She nodded like that was somehow a completely reasonable strategy, because by now, it was. Down in the square, the child who had given him the cookie waved up at the wall, and Jonah waved back before he could stop himself. The boy grinned like he had just been promised the sun would rise again tomorrow. In a way, Jonah supposed he had. Ashford was no longer a town full of strangers scrambling to survive an apocalypse. It was a city that had learned patience, tricks, teamwork, and the quiet, stubborn refusal to be broken by anyone louder than itself. And somewhere beneath his plain, scarred, endlessly reinforced belt, Jonah understood that none of it had happened because of one hidden power. It had happened because ordinary people, given the smallest reason to believe in each other, stopped waiting for legends to save them. Trevor was still locked behind silver light, still smiling like storms belonged to him. Let him smile. Storms end. Cities remain. The rain over Ashford had long since stopped floating and simply fell now, ordinary and clean, washing the last of the black dust from the streets. Jonah watched it fall and thought about how far a comfortable fit had carried him. From a joke in a white room to a title carved above an entire ranking board. He was not the strongest player in the region. He never would be. Not with the sword, not with the spell, not with anything that glowed. But strength had never been the question that mattered. The question was always who noticed the space nobody else was watching, and what they chose to do once they were standing inside it. Jonah had chosen mischief first, then mercy, then something that finally looked a lot like leadership, whether he wanted the word or not. Grace, Owen, and Harper stood beside him on the wall, not because the system had ranked them together, but because none of them had ever needed him to be visible to trust him completely. That was worth more than any legendary weapon hanging in that first white room. The distant gate flashed red again, patient, waiting, indifferent to whether Ashford was ready for it or not. Jonah tightened the plain brown belt until the buckle clicked. One final, familiar sound. Comfortable fit. The belt reminded him quietly exactly the way it had on the very first day. He smiled at that, because after everything, the joke had never actually been on him. It had always been on everyone who assumed a quiet man in a plain belt had nothing worth fearing. Somewhere out past the valley, cruel players were already gathering, confident, loud, and completely unaware that a city behind them had learned to fight without ever needing to be seen. Let them come. Let them laugh at whatever they found waiting on the road. Right up until the moment they realized nothing was actually there. By then, it would already be too late for them, the same way it had always been too late for Trevor. For the fakes, for the bullies, for every single person who mistook silence for weakness. Jonah had spent an entire apocalypse being underestimated, and he had turned every single instance of it into a weapon sharper than any blade. In that first glowing room, now a whole city stood behind him, ready to do the same. Grace lifted her spear toward the horizon, a quiet, wordless promise that Ashford would meet whatever waited in the silent expanse together. Owen cracked his knuckles and grinned, already planning some ridiculous trick nobody had asked for. Harper simply turned back toward her forge, because someone still needed to prepare the weapons nobody would ever actually need to use. And Jonah stood at the center of it all, invisible by choice, respected by earned reputation, and utterly unwilling to be anyone's victim ever again. The belt had never made him a hero in the way the loud, glowing weapons made heroes. It had made him something quieter, and far more dangerous. The last thing any cruel person ever expected to find waiting in the dark. He thought of the white room again, the shining swords, the dragon spears, the golden bows everyone had rushed toward without a second thought. Not one of those players had claimed a city. Not one of those players had a title that made a tower's own ranking board hesitate. The system had never rewarded the loudest choice. It had rewarded the choice nobody else respected enough to make. Jonah looked down at his waist one final time, at the scratched buckle, the reinforced black strips, the ordinary brown leather that had somehow outlasted every legend in the region. It had started as the last item left on a shelf nobody wanted. It had ended as the reason an entire city still stood. That was the whole story, really. Not a chosen one with a destiny, not a warrior born for greatness. Just a man who picked comfort, stayed patient, and let everyone else's cruelty become his greatest advantage. The valley waited. The gates waited. And whatever waited beyond them would eventually learn exactly what Ashford already knew. The empty player was never truly empty at all. He was simply the space you never thought to check, right until it was already too late to matter. Jonah turned from the wall, belt tightened, city behind him steady and glowing under its new silver light. Whatever came next, he would meet it the same way he had met everything else since the sky first cracked open. Quietly, patiently, and completely unseen, until the exact moment it mattered most.